I'm still the director of the games. I'm still director of training also. I still have that responsibility to conduct it. I still have a lot of freedom to conduct it the way that I see, the way that I want it, the direction that I want that event to go. I was still in a very good place.
This is episode number 131 with Dave Castro. Welcome to Pursuing Health. I'm Julie Fouché, family medicine resident and former CrossFit Games athlete. Here, I bring to you information and inspiration from experts and everyday individuals for how to use lifestyle to maximize health. Thank you so much for joining me. Now let's get started with this week's episode. In this episode, I had the opportunity to sit down with director of the CrossFit Games, Dave Castro. Now, this is Dave's second time on the podcast, and if you didn't catch our previous conversation way back in episode 29, I highly recommend going back to listen after this episode for some additional context and insight into Dave's background, especially his time as a Navy SEAL from 1998 to 2010. Dave has been doing CrossFit since the very early days in 2005 at the original CrossFit HQ affiliate in Santa Cruz, California, and he's been involved with CrossFit seminars since that time as well, now serving as co-director of CrossFit training alongside Nicole Carroll. Dave has directed the CrossFit Games since their very first year in 2007 when they were held at his family's ranch in Aromas, California. And since that time, we've seen the games evolve. They've moved from Aromas to Carson, California, and now to Madison, Wisconsin. The format and the qualification process has evolved as well over the years, but some of the biggest and most abrupt changes to the CrossFit Games season have occurred last season, leading into the 2019 CrossFit Games. I was very excited to sit down with Dave, considering that we haven't heard much from him publicly over these past few years and about these changes in particular. We spent a lot of time here talking about the transitions that have happened more recently and how his professional and personal life have changed as a result. We also did dive into some other topics, including why he holds himself and others to such high standards, some of his hobbies outside of CrossFit, and even a little bit about his family, which he rarely talks about. I hope you enjoy this conversation and that you'll stay tuned for our next episode in 2 weeks, which will be a very special one for me and will include a big announcement that has been a few years in the making. Before we get started today, this is also a reminder that although I am now officially a doctor, this podcast is meant to share the experiences of individuals and does not provide medical advice. So with that, let's get started with the episode. Well, welcome back to Pursuing Health.
Thanks, Julie.
I'm
Happy to
really
be
excited. I was just looking, our last episode that we recorded together was May 2016, which was almost 4 years ago.
Wow.
Which is kind of crazy.
A lot's changed since then.
A lot has changed since then. So that was just beginning the 2016 regional season.
Yep.
And then we had the 10th anniversary of the games. We had the move to Madison. You wrote a book. I
wrote a book.
And then obviously last year we had a lot of huge changes to the format of the games.
Yep.
So I thought maybe we could start off with just how does your life look different this year than it did back in 2016?
Wow, 2016 compared to 2020, even 2019, so much has changed for me professionally and personally. One of the big things that happened during the last couple of years, I made a move. I moved from San Diego, Southern California, back up to NorCal, near here, about 40 minutes away from Scotts Valley. Took the whole family, came up here, and for me it was kind of coming full circle, returning home. I left this area in 97 when I enlisted in the Navy, and I always knew somehow or at some point I would come back. And after a few years in the military, I figured it would be after retiring, after doing 20 years in the military, I figured I'd make my way back up here. Obviously, I didn't retire from the Navy. I ended up doing 12 years. And just got out because of my job with CrossFit. Well, when I got out in 2010, I settled and stayed in San Diego for the next almost 8 years. And probably around 2015-16, I started looking for houses and areas up here that I could return to. Because my father was in poor health. Around that time, my mom had passed away. And, my brother's up here with his family. And I figured, a lot of the things I'm into and a lot of things I like to do are up here. So I looked for a few years, and finally I found a place that I felt we could make the move to. And 3 or 4 days before before the 2018 CrossFit Games, we moved up here.
Really?
Yeah, so I moved my whole family up, and then like 2 or 3 days after he hadn't even unpacked, I left to go to Madison
Oh my gosh.
for the games. Interestingly, funny story there. There's this little, not shed, but this little structure on our property, on our new house, and now it's my sewing room, but then it was very dirty and a lot of cobwebs, and like it was used as their storage area. And I was trying to clean it up in one of the days or two that I was still there before I left to Madison. Well, I didn't know it, but some sort of big spider had dropped from the ceiling and bit me.
Oh no.
And so when I got to Madison for the games, I got really sick in 18, and I had this huge welt on my back, and it turned black, and Doc Ray had to prescribe me all this strong medication. And one of the nights before I got prescribed the medication, I woke up just covered in sweat, couldn't sleep, and
oh my gosh.
I'm like, this is not a good way to go
start the games.
To go into the games.
Wow.
So that was one of the big changes, and for me that was super grounding, because then after that, in that time frame, there was a lot of changes, and for me, it's been incredibly rewarding, and I'm very happy being back up here. The family's adjusting.
Okay. It's a little different.
For me, yeah, it's a little different for them, but for me, this is a way better place for me to be. Better lifestyle, better routine.
Feels like home.
Feels like home is home. I go to the ranch. I don't live on the ranch. Some people think I do. My brother still lives there. I grew up on the ranch, but I go there every day now, 2 or 3 times a day, depending on what I have going on. And so it's been good. That's
really cool. You said family's still adjusting. You don't talk much about your family, and that's intentional.
Very intentional.
Yeah.
I talk about it a little in my book, actually.
Yeah.
And I keep them out of the limelight, because I don't think it's a healthy place to be, or a healthy place to put my family. I see the attacks I get online, and I see the stuff that people say about me, and I don't ever want to have to deal with anybody saying anything about my family. And, I said this in the book, this line almost exactly. You see Rich Froning or Jason's kids. I could see them in the street. We could go to Starbucks right now, and I'd be able to recognize their children. And I don't know how safe and responsible that is. I don't want that to happen to my children. I'm not even comfortable. I don't even like getting recognized as much as I do out in public. Yeah. The last thing I want is that to happen to my children or my wife, to be out in public and they're recognized because I post them on my social media. I have several 100,000 followers. It doesn't mean I have several 100,000 friends.
Right.
I am acutely aware that most of those people following me aren't even my friends, and that's okay. Right. And that's how I view social media, and that's how I view that number. Those aren't fans; those are just people, and they don't have access to that side of me, and nor should they. And that's my private life, and I like to keep that separate. I have to keep it separate.
So do your kids, I remember being young and being like, oh, what does your dad do for work? And I'd be like, I don't know, he just works on the computer all day. Do they have any idea what you do, or do they care?
Yes, and it's starting to get interesting in terms of one of my daughters is in high school. Okay. And a lot of the other kids know.
Yeah.
And know I have a big following and know, who I am. And so my teenager's very aware of it. And my 10-year-old recently came home and asked my daughter or my wife if daddy's famous, because people talk about me at school. And so it is getting to that stage.
Now they're getting old enough.
Yeah.
You have to address it. Does your family do CrossFit, or do they have any connection to?
My wife
CrossFit?
does,
okay.
And she's been doing CrossFit for a very long time. My children don't. I've tried to get them to do CrossFit, but they're not into it yet. Okay. My oldest has talked about doing it. Hopefully, she eventually will. I think they both will. It's just such a part of the household that I think they'll do it when they're ready. It was the same with my wife. I tried getting her to do it years ago with me when I was first doing it, and it didn't work out. Mm-hmm. She had to find it on.
Force it.
Yeah, she had to find it on her own, and she has. And she goes to a gym. She trains, and that was one of the adjustment points when we lived in Carlsbad in San Diego. We were a couple minutes away from the gym.
Right.
Now out where we live. We're out in the hills kind of, and she's 15, 20 minutes away from her local gym.
So that's harder.
Yep.
And to adjust, even just switching gyms or switching communities is always hard. So.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so some of these changes, obviously a lot has changed, like you said, for you personally with the move. A lot of these changes came as a big surprise for much of the CrossFit community, or it seemed very abrupt or very sudden. Changes to the qualification process, the switch in the .com, and this focus on CrossFit Health. How was that whole process for you? Like, how did you find out about the changes? What was your role in all of this transition?
There was a lot of discussion going on. There was a lot of talk. We knew, some of our team, we knew a lot of this stuff was coming. Some of it was announced very quickly, and that was just the nature of some of this stuff and change. It was a trying time, especially seeing, a lot of these people being let go. And as far as the changes to the format and the changes to the actual system, that didn't bother me too much, because if you paid attention closely to the games throughout its history, we were constantly changing and tweaking and modifying, and change, I believe, is good. This came quickly. This came with not a lot of, let's say, of all the changes made to the games, some of these I didn't influence as much as I have in the past, and that's fine. And that's okay. I don't. I'm a good worker and also a good leader, so I can be a good worker bee and follow orders well. That comes from especially from my time in the military. So as quickly as they happened, it was still here it is, here's what you got to do, move forward with it and make it happen. And if you're me, when I say you, and if you're unhappy, find something else to do. If you can be happy with it and content and you still want to do this, keep doing it. And I was fine with it. And it's interesting because I put it in perspective too. A lot of people reached out and how do you feel? What do you think of all this stuff going on? How's it? And I was like, well, I deployed to Afghanistan 4 or 5 times, and I deployed to Iraq, and I've had people shooting at me, and I've been in much worse situations than anything like this. So this is all fine.
Right.
And as fast as it happened, it's actually really slow compared to. I say that statement in terms of comparing it to what I used to do, where things happen so fast and life or death situations were determined by quick decisions. And so all this stuff, as quickly as it was going down, was slow to me. A lot of time to process, a lot of time to work through, a lot of time to figure out.
It's all relative, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, how did it look? Like you said, the games team obviously changed a lot in that period of time, and you said it was hard to see some people go. How, I talked to you before on the podcast. I've talked to Justin Berg and about how the games team was functioning at that time in the 2016 to 2018 time period where we had this very well-oiled machine.
Yeah.
So how did the games team change, or how did it look different last year from years past?
Well, the core games team is much smaller. We have a smaller staff, and the big let's say group that's gone is the media team. We don't have a big games media team. We don't. Other than that, the core group running it and the core group running it on site at the games looks very similar. It's a lot of the operations people, a lot of the people who were not involved in media didn't go away, and some that did are contracted back at the games to run the games. The games for me felt the same. That whole process feels the same. It's not much has changed there, even though a ton has changed there. A lot has changed, but for me personally, I don't view, even with the larger numbers and everything,
Right.
It's still the task at hand, and it's still what I need to work on, what I need to do, and it feels the same.
With, you sort of touched on this earlier, but with any change, obviously there's positives and negatives. What do you think are some of the big positives that came out of everything that changed last year? And then what are some of the big challenges, I guess, that you faced from the changes?
Some of the big positives are just, again, I think people are resistant to change, and I think people being more tolerant and accepting of change is a good thing. And I think this forced all of us to learn how to deal with, and people who weren't prepared for it, people in the community, staff, athletes. Hey, this is life.
Right.
You're gonna get handed things you don't like to deal with and change you don't want to deal with, and so it was all a good lesson in life for so many of us. And that's a positive from it.
You said, I want to just touch on that. You said, obviously, you had a lot of experience with this and much more life and death situations from your time in the Navy, but how do you go about processing that? Like, for the average person, change is hard. So how do you, in your mind, obviously at first there's probably a lot of different emotions going around, but how did you process it and then come to this place where you're like, this is okay, this is life, we're going to move forward?
I'm still the director of the games. I'm still director of training also. I still have that responsibility to conduct it. I still have a lot of freedom to conduct it the way that I see, the way that I want it, the direction that I want that event to go. I was still in a very good place. I didn't get fired. I didn't have it taken away from me.
Yeah.
To that degree. So I was really like, okay, it's just, hey, this is the direction. This is what they want. I'm going to work with it.
Yeah.
I'm going to make it happen. And
being sort of grateful, it sounds like, too, like looking at the positives. These are all the,
I have a great opportunity.
Yeah.
Look, and the other thing is, I was thinking about this the other day, and I was like, you know what? Greg Glassman saved my life. And I want to articulate what I mean by that. I got out of the military at 12 years to work full-time for CrossFit. From 2006 to 2010, I was working for CrossFit, 2007, 2010, and I was active duty Navy. I was teaching buds in Coronado. And then it came to a point where I had to re-enlist, I could stay in and not work for CrossFit anymore, because if I chose to stay in, I would go deploy again. I'd go operational. Or I could get out and work full-time for CrossFit. CrossFit provided much better for me and my family than the Navy could. I loved what I did in the Navy. So I chose to get out because of the opportunity and work full-time for CrossFit. I believe if I would have stayed in, I truly believe this, and it might be ridiculous, I wouldn't be here today. If I would have stayed for another, and people always say, hey, 8 years, that's not a long time. Why didn't you stay and retire? Just do your 20.
A lot can happen.
In our line of work, with what I did, 8 years is 8 lifetimes.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of friends. I know a lot of people who've passed away, who've been killed in combat, who've died because of combat-related things, who are different after being deployed so many times. And the thing is, that's all I would do. If I stayed in, I would go back and I would throw myself as full as I could into deploying and going out there and doing what we do. And I just don't know if, and it sounds ridiculous, but it's what I feel. I just don't think I'd be here. I don't think, because of the way I was and how much I trained for it and cared about it and wanted to do it, even like I do with the games, I throw myself into this stuff and I'm really passionate about it. I was that way about that. And so that's why I say he saved my life. He gave me an opportunity to continue to contribute in another way and to have a good, secure life and job while leaving that behind. And I loved that. And that was so important. So I take all that into perspective, Yeah. So with all these changes, I'm like, hey, I'm in a great position. I'm not doing that anymore, which again, though, I say that, but I loved that. And I also think that would have been a bad path to go down.
Okay. So sorry, I interrupted you halfway. So
No,
you said those
fine.
are some of the positives, I guess, that came out of the change, but what have been some of the biggest challenges for you with some of the changes that have happened over the last year?
Let's talk more about positives.
Okay, yeah, let's go with that.
One of the big positives, another big positive is, not doing open announcements and not going to the regionals has been a huge weight off my shoulders.
Yes.
I don't have to, if that's 5 weekends or 5 weeks of open announcements, 3 or 4 weeks of regionals. It's 9-10 weeks of traveling just for events. And it's been very nice not having to do
all of that
travel. With the open announcements and the open, I knew personally and professionally within the next year or two, I was going to pull myself entirely out of that. It was accelerated and not necessarily by my choice, which I would have rather had control of how that went down.
Sure.
Whatever. And again, it's just like, okay, deal with it. But the thing is, so that's why it wasn't too big of a deal to me. Those close to me know I was already really past that. Like, okay, I'm going to stop doing these. they're a lot of work. They're fun, but
it's draining.
It's draining, and it also isn't what I wanted to continue. I didn't want to go that route of always announcing those workouts. So that was coming anyways. Again, it just happened not on my timeline, which, I like to be in control of things, and sometimes you're not, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's life.
And so, so now not going to regionals, because those don't exist, it's also been great. I'm able to focus on the open. I'm able to focus on the games. I'm able to focus on training. A lot of, people only think I work the games. It's, because you work in the training department on the level 1 team. I also, with Nicole Carroll, co-direct the training of CrossFit. So that keeps me busy, and that's the true 365-day job that I have with CrossFit. That's how I started. I started doing training before I was doing the games.
And let alone, just traveling for those events, but I imagine the planning and the programming for the regionals. Now you don't have to worry about all of those things. What has it been like for you I know you intentionally don't necessarily go watch any of the sanctionals, but what has it been like for you to kind of peripherally see now all of these other groups trying to sort of recreate the regionals in their own way?
I don't watch any of them. I don't pay attention to the programming of any of them, and I don't really know what's going on with any of them.
Okay.
It is not, and I won't travel to any of them. With my time is precious. Everyone's time is precious. Your time, my time, anyone's is. And how you prioritize it and what you do with that is very special. And I am not going to go to any of these events that I'm not responsible for or running as a fan or as a spectator, or if it's not my idea of fun is not going to a CrossFit event. I have a major CrossFit event that I run and that I'm responsible for, and I put a lot of energy and time into that. It's very consuming, and that's great, and that's the only one I want to be involved with. These others, here's the thing, if this format was created to where we were responsible for every single one and overseeing them, sure, you'd be seeing me go to them because it's something I'm in charge of and it's something I need to make sure is functioning the way I'd like to see it go, but that's not the system. And so I don't go to any of them. I don't pay attention. So on social media, on my main account, I don't follow anybody. And so it's easy not to see that stuff. Some stuff is hard, and I don't ever watch any of them. So whenever we stream them, I'm never tuning in. I'm never looking at anybody else's programming. The extent of what I know about the programming of some of these events, the biathlon that Rogue did, that was very noisy, I'll say. Not noisy, but it was out there, and I heard about that.
People talking about it.
Yeah, I heard about that. So I know they did that. I don't know what format they did. I don't know how they did it. I've had people ask me if I'd help them with their programming. Most I just say no to straight up. Josh Bridges asked me for a little help with the, I guess it was the Rogue one.
The Rogue one, yeah.
We didn't end up taking that any further. Rich asked me to help with his. He actually sent me workouts to look through and go through, and I looked at them and I didn't look at them. I looked at them and I said, I'm not doing this. And it's just not like, programming for me is really time consuming and hard, and it's not as simple as saying, yeah, that's a cool test. Let's run with it, Rich. It's funny because I was texting with him, and so I blew him off months ago. He would send me his proposed events like 5-6 months in advance. Good on him for being so prepared in advance. And I was like, I'm not doing I'm not doing this, and I didn't bother responding to him. We actually texted last night, and he said, I asked him how his event went. He said, good, I think. And he said, did you look at any of the workouts? And I just said, no. And and here's one of the reasons why I don't. A, I talk about the time and how consuming all that stuff is. And B, I don't look at any of this stuff without a critical eye. I don't go to any of these events without thinking about how to make them better, how to do this, how this should be run. I've been running these events for now 12 years. And so I have developed a view of these things, a way I think they should be done and how things should be moving. That is, I don't want to go to an event, look at someone's programming and just instantly be critical of it and instantly have something to say, because that's what will happen. And that's how I feel. Yeah. And interestingly enough, even pre all these changes, I never went to other events. I didn't travel ever for, Wadapalooza or Granite Games or some of the other big events that were going on pre these changes. I'd go to local events when I was in San Diego. I ended up going to OC Throwdown was probably the biggest event that I ever went to. And even when I went there, I didn't watch the event. I went, gave support to the event director, and then left. And that's what I do to the small competitions too. Even to this day, if there's small competitions around, I try to go to them and show a little support and then take off. But I don't stay and watch the events. So I truthfully don't know much about their programming or much about what they do. I do have people ask some questions about programming.
Right.
My biggest recommendation with the programming is, especially at this stage, just keep it basic, keep it core. I think, there's going to be this race to the top of everyone trying to outdo each other and trying to be gimmicky and trying to do the next best thing. And it's really all you got to do is constantly varied functional movements at high intensity and just keep it foundational and pure CrossFit. Ultimately, they're a qualifier for the games, and they should view themselves as a qualification step to the games. And some might not think that's the way they want to view themselves, and that's fine. But you want to get the fittest people to the games.
Right. So obviously, you don't have direct oversight over these events, but they are a qualification to the games. And so what role does CrossFit play in dictating, okay, who's going to be a sanctioned event, which will act as a qualifier, and then how do we make sure that they're getting, quote unquote, the right people to the games?
We have a small team that decides on which events are going to be actually accepted into our list of sanctioned events. And then at that point, in terms of who they qualify to the game and who makes it, we're very hands off and by design. And, it's not, there's going to be one of these events one day where a bunch of, I don't want to say low level, but not the best athletes show up and someone qualifies who's much lower level than all the other real core
yes,
elite
the people
games
that you would
athletes.
expect,
yes,
people at the top
exactly.
of the open leaderboard. Yeah.
Because but it doesn't matter to me. Whatever, especially with this new country championship thing, where all these other people of varying abilities are able to make it to the games. Someone squeaking through a sanctioned event I say squeaking through. Yeah. Someone making it through a sanctioned event that isn't at the level of the top guys is not a big deal because the country championship kind of levels that all out anyways, the country champions.
That makes sense. How about the judging at those events? I know there's always a lot of talk about that. You obviously have very professional judges at the games, and when you did regionals, you did the same thing there. But at these events, obviously they have say over how they're going to approach judging and the qualifications that the judges have or the training that they have. Is that also just completely left up to them about how they're going to?
Yeah, it's completely left up to them. And I think at this stage, there's enough community strength in that pool of judging and talent out there that we've developed over the years and other events have developed that I'd like to think judging is not an issue at these events. But truthfully, I don't know. I really don't pay attention at all to that. And, I've had a few people email me and DM me and complain about things and normally about stuff like that, but I don't see it on this huge, large scale. And maybe it is an issue. Maybe it is something that I'm not aware of. And at this point, I'm not involved, so I'm not going to get involved.
And I think it's an interesting, what you just said, though, was interesting, that now it seems like just looking at the qualification process as a whole, it's obviously very different. In the previous open to regionals to games process, we were getting, a very core group of people to the games who are all very close in their ability levels. And now we've really opened the playing field. So there's a lot more people at the games, a lot wider range of ability. You can qualify through the open even without having a hands-on event or a live event. You have the country champions who are coming in at various levels. So what's your perspective on, what is the role? It sounds like the role is not necessarily to get the top 150 people or whatever to the games, but it still is to find the fittest or to find the top 3 fittest. How do you approach
so far
that?
with this format, I don't think we're leaving out the fittest in the world, which is good. If in all these changes the fittest athletes weren't making it to the games, there'd be something wrong with it. But because of the multiple avenues of qualification to get there, if you're really fit and you're in the top mix of guys or women competitors, you are going to be able to make it.
Yeah.
Top 20 in the open. Arguably the games could be just the top 20 in the open, and that you're not leaving anybody out. We can argue that
maybe
all
not
day.
leaving out podium finishers.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think if you're one of the fittest athletes in the world, you should be at the games. You can be at the games. Plenty of opportunities.
Is your goal for the games? What is your goal for the games? Is it to find the fittest? Is it to get the top 5 people in the right order? Like how do you approach it?
No, it's the fittest. I just view it as, okay, we're going to test it and find the number 1 spot, and we're going to challenge them, and we're going to push them, and we're going to make sure that the individual that stands on the podium is the fittest alive. And interestingly enough, you look at our past 2 male champions, and even you can say this now with Tia, they're both so dominant and so well-rounded. They are what we're looking for. If every year someone different was winning, and one year Chris Spieler won and one year Tommy Hackenbrick won, you're going to see it's something's wrong with the programming, or something's up with how it's going down. And I did that example because there's such extremes in body types. But the gentlemen winning, Matt and Rich, they both won multiple years in a row. They're both similar in size, and the thing is, when you have the same people winning over and over, geez, you can even say it for the female side. It's not a programming. It's not they got lucky with the programming. No,
right.
It's because they're so fit and they're so well rounded. They don't have any chinks. I've said this before too, and when someone says, "Oh, well, the programming at this event didn't favor me," if you have to say that, you're not completely prepared. You're not the fittest. You're not well rounded. You never see Rich or Matt complain about the programming, because wherever they go, whatever it is, they're going to thrive and they're going to do well because they are prepared for whatever is thrown at them.
It's so true. And I think that's the difference between like a champion, the fittest, and even, the next, I don't know, top 10 or top 20.
For sure.
Those numbers can definitely sway one way or the other depending on the programming, but it's true. The fittest are always going to find their way to the top.
Yep, exactly.
Sure.
And that's what we're looking for. We're not looking to highlight the strongest. We're not looking to highlight the fastest. We're looking to highlight the most well-rounded athlete.
Some of the other things I've noticed, so now obviously you can qualify through the open. I've noticed it seems like a bigger push or some more effort towards drug testing. I think you just posted the other day about the latest, person who's been disqualified due to a failed drug test. And then also being a little bit harder on the video reviews. Is that...
The drug testing, I don't feel like we're going harder. We've always had a really aggressive program.
Yeah.
The way this format works now, there's just a lot more events and a lot more opportunities for testing because we don't have the events, so we have to send people to these other events. We have to send our testing groups to these other events to test people. I don't feel like it's expanded or bigger. We've always had a wide blanket. We've always tested a lot. Now, here's the thing. Testing a lot is all relative because there's hundreds of thousands of people doing this.
Yeah.
So do we test tens of thousands? No. Do we test several thousand? No. But we test a lot of people.
Yeah.
And we have to, our testing is targeted. It has to be, meaning like we have to test the best people. We have to test people who we get notified, hey, maybe you should test this person. So we get that all the time, and oftentimes someone will say, hey, you should maybe test this person. We just don't instantly test them. We'll do our own research. We'll look at things, and then we'll have them tested. Is our system perfect? Absolutely not. But none of the systems are perfect.
Right.
And we put a lot into it. We work really hard at it, and we want it to be clean. Will it ever? The winners are definitely clean. Are there people there at the games that are not clean? For sure. And but we're trying to make sure everyone there is clean.
And with the video reviews too, I think we've seen maybe harsher penalties than in years past.
Yeah.
Is that just a reflection of the fact that now people can qualify through the open, and so we need to be reviewing everyone with a little bit more scrutiny?
Exactly. And, since the open is a direct path to the games now, we had to tighten that up a little more and really make sure the standards and what people are doing are what we wanted. The open is hard to run. The open is,
it's amazing. There's nothing else like it, right?
Yeah, it's really hard. And making the workouts and then everything that happens after that, to include the judging, the reviewing of videos. A lot of people are involved in that. I don't watch any of the videos, but we have a team and we have a lot of people who do that. but it's a lot of work. A lot goes into it. Lot of action behind the scenes with the Open. It's just there's the team here, Justin Berg, Curtis Bowler, and those guys. They're doing a ton of work. Dave Eubanks around the Open. Curtis with drug testing.
Okay. Who is the core games team now?
Well, me, Justin, Dave is very critical to what's going on. And there's a handful of other people who have smaller roles, but that's
all kind of
yeah
comes together to support it. Okay. So talked about a lot of these changes in the qualifications. I want to talk a little bit just about the 2019 games. So now that you went through the whole season, you were there at the games, you saw how it all played out. What were some of your reflections after the 2019 games?
I was happy. I was very happy at the games. I liked the first workout.
Mm-hmm. I loved that.
A lot of people didn't like the first workout, even internally. I thought it was a great first workout. It's a great wake-up call. Like, hey, you get to play with the big boys.
Yeah.
Play with the big boys. Sorry. You get it. Now you have to step up. You want to be at the games. You're at the games. Welcome to the games. And that's what I really liked about it. The cuts were cool. You know, that wasn't the first time we had cuts. We've had cuts multiple years. Early on, we had a lot of cuts. Then we kind of went away from the cuts, and we're back at the cuts. The timing of the cuts really was controversial, but I was okay with it. And you know what's interesting about everyone who did get cut? You never, even the sprint, you didn't get cut because of that.
Right.
You got cut because of that and performance in other events that kept you down and low. And, Matt had a horrible sprint. But again, he had done very well on everything else, so he had enough points to advance. The right people advanced. Then some of the workouts, then having such a small field for the next couple days, allowed us a lot of flexibility and a lot of freedom to do cool things like that clean event.
That was awesome.
So that format couldn't be done with 20 men and 20 women. That format couldn't be done with more than 10. It could. Actually, let me rephrase that. It could. You just be there all night. You just be there all day.
It would be a longer day.
Yeah, exactly. So that format worked great, and that's something you can do when you have 10 and 10. Some of the other tests and events we had, same concept. You couldn't do things like that, and that's why I was excited about the format. It's like, okay, now we get to have some fun with scheduling, with testing, with all of it. And, we're going to continue to have cuts this year again, so there'll be a lot of controversy around that too.
Of course. Do you think, looking back on the cuts, I know there was especially a lot of controversy about that cut right after the sprint, and people saying that the tests before that sprint and leading up to that sprint were not well-rounded.
Mm-hmm.
Before, like not having a heavy, waiting for the clean until after that cut to balance things. What do you say to that?
I mean, that first test was heavy.
Yeah.
You needed to be strong. There was that you needed to be strong to do well on that first test. It wasn't your typical. You needed to be strong and well-rounded. Let's put it that way. And that's the kind of strength we're looking for. We're not looking for someone. We're not looking for the strongest. We're looking for the fittest. And you're going to express that strength at high heart rate. In a limited number of tests, let's say you have 4 or 5 tests. I want to try to capture a lot of fitness and less of specialty.
Yes.
And so in 4 or 5 tests, there's not going to be as many isolated things, like isolated strength tests, for example. Now, the other point to that, let's talk logistically. It's really hard to test strength amongst, a couple hundred people down to 50. The tests that we did do and that we did give them, I thought were completely fair. And, the sprint was definitely a curveball. Some people were prepared for it and others weren't. But I didn't have any issue with it at all.
What was it like for you to have all the country champions there, or to have, obviously it was that first event that was sort of the huge differentiator, but how do you think that went?
That was really cool. It was neat to have them there, the representation. It was definitely a change from, the games in the past were very, I'll say, elite and had the best in the world there. Now they're inclusive. And they necessarily have some athletes that aren't the best in the world there. And that's the direction it's going. We're taking it. And that's fine. So it's a little shift in focus or priority, but that's okay. And they were all very gracious, and it was cool to see them there and all the country flags, and it was fun.
Yeah. Talking about programming a little bit. So you write about, obviously in your book, you go through a lot of your process for programming, and you talked about, and when you were down in San Diego, you had a specific dedicated space where you would go, and that was kind of your creative space. Do you have something like that up here?
The ranch.
The ranch.
Yeah, and it's that dedicated space in San Diego was great, and especially for that environment down there, it being able to separate, being able to, okay, I did my training work at home, and then I drive 5 minutes over to this office, this facility where I had whiteboards, and I'd be able to, just focus on the creative side was huge. And it was it helped me a lot in programming the games. I've kind of replicated that, not as clean, let's say, not as efficiently at the ranch and in my house again. So I'd love to have a dedicated facility like that at the ranch, but just like where we don't do anything else, but I don't. So
right. It's hard to separate. There's a lot that happens at the ranch.
Yeah, there's something about the book, that it was interesting. Someone in HQ said, "Oh, did you go to one of those write a book in a weekend clinics and just write it in a weekend?" And I was like, "Well, you obviously haven't read it because I spent a lot of time on that book." And one of the things that I wanted to do on that book was write it myself. A lot of people write books and they have, other people write them for them. And so the format I like to say it's pretty easy. It was basically just entries. Every day I'd write something in it about what I did that day. It was still hard. The way I chose to do it, I say, is easy, but writing the book was still a lot of work and hard. It was also really good that year. It helped me in those games. It helped my creative process. It helped me even organize how I do things. I've thought about doing it again. I don't know if I'm going to. I thought about doing it this year. I'm not going to this year, but I might. But it was also, I'm very proud of it. I'm very happy that I did that. It was rewarding. The process it taught a lot. Taught me a lot about myself. I thought about writing other books too, but I don't know if I'm going to.
And you read a lot too. I think last time you were on, I was asking you about books you were reading. Anything that you've read recently that has been really great, or any new genres that you've gotten into?
I do read a lot. I read 50 books last year. Wow. And right now I'm reading a book on Churchill, which is really interesting, a biography, which is really interesting. I'm enjoying it. It's taking a little longer than I'd like. It's almost 1,000 pages. Generally, I read first thing in the morning. Okay. Anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on what I have going on that day. And then I'll read at random intervals throughout the day, and then I'll read at night. And reading in the morning is great because it kind of just warms everything up and gets you prepared for the day. But because I read so much now, some people have trouble reading and sitting down and doing that. It's so easy for me to read. And I'm not a fast reader. I'm just able to read anytime I want. I have the hard copy of the book. I like reading hard copy. And I almost always download the digital version on my phone. So I'll finish reading the hard copy and I'll look where I'm at. Then I'll find the place on the digital version to mark it. And so if I'm somewhere waiting for something, I'll just pick up my phone and start reading. And that helps me get through.
That's really smart.
So with this book, I was trying to do 50 pages a day. This book's really dense in number of words per page. So I was maintaining that for a while. I've been kind of busy the past week, so kind of fell off. I should be finished with the book in the next couple of days. But generally speaking, what I try to do is a book a week. Sometimes I hit that, sometimes I don't, depending on how busy I am with other work stuff. I'm enjoying this book. All the Pretty Horses. It was the book I read before this. I enjoyed that a lot. I read a lot of classics last year, American classics. Old Man in the Sea, a lot of Hemingway. Wow. Let me see.
You have a list, probably.
I have a list.
That is so impressive to me.
The Great Gatsby, really enjoyed that. Catcher in the Rye, Pride and Prejudice, I enjoyed that. Old Man and the Sea, To Kill a Mockingbird, Lord of the Flies.
Oh, that was one of my favorites.
Scarlet Letter, Walden, The Crucible. I mean, I could keep going down. There's just like books like that, and I just enjoy. I'm I enjoy the escapism of it. I enjoy just disconnecting and not dealing with CrossFit or work or other things, and just getting out there, and it's been really good for me. I basically started around that time with this hard dive into reading, 5 years ago, around 2015, and it'll never leave me at this point. It's just part of my routine, part of my life, and that's a really good thing to have that routine as part of your life. People prioritize working out in their life, but not a lot of people prioritize something like reading
or learning. Yeah.
Yep.
It's very true. Very true. I'm jumping all around, but back to programming. What is your process? In the book, you talk about, obviously you had all these different things. You had the open and the regionals and the games. So you're basically doing things in sequence. And once regionals are all sort of set and in motion, then you really dive into the games. But especially now that we just had the open in October, now there's all of this time before the game. So are you approaching things any differently for this year's games as far as
Well, so I'm
goes?
definitely thinking about the games and working on the games much earlier than I did in years past. Because typically at this time during regionals, I'd be into regional programming.
Yeah.
Maybe even just finishing up the open.
Yeah.
And that would be, it should be done months before this, but sometimes I push the limits on when things get turned in on workout in terms of events and tests. But now it's just focus on the games. And I have some events down. I have some big picture ideas down. But in the next few weeks, it'll start really coming together and diving into harder.
But that's still really early.
It is very early. It is but I mean, there was after last year's game, and this is true about every year's games. As soon as the games are over, last year I have 2 or 3 events thought of for the next year. Yep.
Just based on how things went and seeing the venue and.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Sometimes my most creative time in events is moments after the games that year.
How have you liked the move to Madison? And now we're going into our 4th year there. So obviously you've had some time to see the events evolve over those last few years.
I'm very happy with Madison. Madison's been a great city. It's a great location. The venue is perfect for what we need to do. There could be a couple other things, like a big field, kind of like we had at Carson. That would be a dedicated field like that. That would be better, but we make it work. Really happy with the city, the facilities. I think the fans like it. I think the athletes like it.
It's a great experience.
It's nice to go into a small town like that. They might not think of themselves as a small town, but it's nice to go into a place like that where basically the whole weekend and the whole city is branded and about CrossFit and about the athletes and about the community. So you would never have that in LA because LA is just so big.
Right. There were so many other big events going on even the same weekend.
Yep, exactly.
You can get lost in it. You also said in your book that you recognize that you are a polarizing figure in CrossFit. Why do you say that?
Oh, man. I mean, there's probably a number of specific events I could point to, and there's a number of things I do. Well, let's take a more recent reason why. I'm an avid shooter, and I sometimes post about my guns, and sometimes I hunt now too, and sometimes I'll post about that, and some people are triggered by that, and some people don't agree with that. That's fine. Don't agree with it. But, you don't so if there's people who are anti-gun, you don't find me on their sites saying, hey, don't post that you're anti-gun.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's your own prerogative, and that's your own decision. And the fact that I do is don't come over to my site and tell me what to post and what not to post because you don't agree with my support of it or my take on it. I think it's ridiculous that we can't have conversations about this stuff, and I think it's ridiculous that people can't post things they support and want to do without getting
a personal attack,
without getting attacked, or there's this whole cancel culture going on where people boycott comedians and artists for supporting views that are different than theirs. That's the problem. Like, we're all going to have different views, and that's okay. I wish it was okay that we could talk about politics, religion, guns, and all this stuff. But we can't because people get so angry over some of this stuff. And again, I have different views than a lot of people on a lot of those things, and that's perfectly fine. And they can have different views. But it doesn't give you the right to tell me that I'm wrong and I shouldn't be doing that because I don't have the same views as you.
Mm-hmm.
Say that privately. Say that to me privately, but don't come attack me on my page or wherever about that. That's also not the only reason why I'm polarizing. I've been polarizing because of I'm in a position where I have to make a lot of hard decisions, and sometimes decisions are
not everybody's
have
gonna
consequences,
agree with them.
and sometimes people get upset over them, and sometimes athletes get mad at me because they don't like things. An athlete just the other day posted something about said I yelled at her, and she doesn't agree with some of the way we do things. And athletes get mad at me a lot, and they have followings, and they have their fans, and so their fans get mad at me. I've been at other events where I speak my mind and I'm opinionated, and sometimes people struggle with being called out. I think I'm very fair, and I think I hold myself to a high standard. So I think if I'm saying something or calling someone out, I think it's usually fair and appropriate. And that's easy to say from my perspective.
Sure. Sure. But I think I appreciate that, how you, like you said, you don't necessarily hold back. Like you do think about what you say first and you put it out there, but you're not afraid to, like, oh, I'm going to offend someone, so I shouldn't say this, or I shouldn't put it out there, because I think there's not enough people who are doing that.
This is not for me, this is not a popularity contest. I'm not in this to gain friends. I'm not in this to make people like me. I'm not in this for likes. I'm in this to do a job, and I'm in this to do this job effectively and to do the job well. And I hold myself to a high standard. And sometimes doing the job well and holding yourself to a high standard isn't the popular way to go, isn't the popular approach. And that's okay. And you know what? I'm going to make decisions. And whenever you're in a leadership role, anyone who's in a leadership role, you're going to make decisions. You should make decisions. You should do things that aren't popular, but oftentimes they're the right thing. And that's tough. Some people struggle with making those decisions because they know people aren't going to agree with them.
Mm-hmm. And I think it was cool to see in your book too how you are very, like, you do hold yourself to a very high standard. Like, you would make comments about things that, like, you wish it was just the end of the day and you're writing your reflection, and things didn't go well today, or I'm going to do this differently tomorrow, and you're a normal human like every other person. But to see you comment on that, I think was very refreshing. Or I think you commented about one, like, you made a post about a workout and you posted the workout wrong and you were like beating yourself up for it in the book, which is like something that everyone does.
I hold myself to a really high, here, let me back up even.
Yeah.
I hold people to a really high standard.
Yeah.
And you can't hold people to a really high standard if you don't hold yourself to a really high standard. And that's really important. And arguably, I hold myself to a much higher standard than I hold a lot of people to. And holding people to a high standard, that's tough. I mean, you sometimes hurt feelings. Sometimes people get upset. But I wouldn't have it any other way. I wouldn't be any other way. And a lot of that came from my time in the military, obviously being in the Navy. People held us to a very high standard. And rightfully so. We should be held to a high standard. And so that's carried over, and it's made people, I'm demanding of people. It's probably ruined some relationships, but it is the way it is. Now, to go back to holding myself to a high standard, I'm my biggest critic. I will critique my workouts, tests, events, critique my performances, critique everything I do, and not with like, you did great, Dave.
Yeah.
Like, that's, why'd you do that?
Right.
Or, this could be better.
Right.
But what's good about that is they're all learning opportunities. They're all potential points to make myself better or to make other people better, because I learned from it. And here's what I learned. So here's something you can learn from that.
Mm-hmm. And it really elevates everyone around you, right? When you hold people, it's like you're holding this carrot out in front of people. You're helping them to be better than they are.
Absolutely. I don't try to, and I'm not, especially with my social media, I don't try to preach. I don't try to motivate people. I don't try to tell people how to conduct themselves, how to live, conquer your day, do this, do that. That's not
I can't see Dave posting like an inspirational quote.
No, I don't do that. But But if you want to be inspired by, let my actions inspire you, not my words. And that's how I feel strongly about it. Let how I hold myself, what I do, how I conduct myself in business, let that be your, if you want to choose me to be inspired by, which I don't care if you do or don't, not you, but that you, let how I conduct myself be your inspiration. Let my actions inspire you, not my words. And I feel pretty strongly about that.
I love that. In our last conversation, you had said, you were talking about the games team in particular, and you had said, I like to believe that we as a team are capable of more than we as a team think we are.
Yeah.
And I think, that's just what you were talking about. But I think you do that also for the entire CrossFit community. And if you think about even the programming that you've put out for the opens, for the regionals, for the games, like you're constantly helping people to do things that they don't think they're capable of doing. And then you're showing them, hey, you can do this.
Especially with the open.
Yeah.
And that's been really cool and fun and challenging to find those things like, okay, what's going to push the community this year? And it's not every event or test. I keep saying event to test, and I want to clarify this with my team all the time. They're not workouts. You work out in your gym. You work out at home. But at the games, and in my eyes, even in the open, but at the games and in the open, those are tests and those are events. Yeah. You train for those, you work out for those, but when you do those, you don't ever hear a 100-meter dash runner or a marathon runner or
I'm going to go do a workout at the Olympics.
Yeah, exactly. They're not going to work out. They're going to do a test. Yeah. They're going to do a challenge. They're going to do their event.
Yeah.
And so I got someone on my team the other day about that. They sent me the age group qualifiers, and they labeled them workout 1, workout 2, workout. And I'm like, these aren't workouts. These are call them tests or events, E1, E2, but they're not workouts. I feel strongly about that. And sometimes I even still in conversation mix that up. On that note too, I don't know if I talked about this on yours, but I can't stand when people talk about their sport and say, oh, I work out for a living, or you're just degrading it, demeaning it, just devaluing it, or I exercise for time and all that stuff. No, you don't. If you're competing, this is your sport. Yeah. And again, like those examples, running is a workout. Weightlifting is a workout. But those guys don't say, I work out for time. No, They say, I'm a runner or I'm a weightlifter. And they're proud of that because they're competing in it. And same thing with CrossFit. It's a legitimate sport. It's a real sport. And the athletes especially, this is to all the athletes, you should be proud of that.
Yeah, absolutely. But it has been cool to see the community come so far in pushing them every year with the open or putting those carrots out in front of people and helping them realize the things that they really are capable of, because so much of it is really what happens between the ears.
And interestingly, you'll hear oftentimes, people always say how some of those are the toughest workouts they do, but workouts, it's because they might not practice some of that stuff in their box, or B, I think a lot of the intensity sometimes has been lost in application. I think some people aren't going as hard as they need to, and then in that environment, you're really going hard because it's the ultimate test. What preserves the intensity and continues to solidify the importance of intensity is benchmarks. And I don't even mean our benchmarks. I just mean benchmarks in general. Create a workout and revisit it. Revisit it in 2 weeks. Sometimes people don't revisit workouts often enough. Sometimes I'll do workouts a couple days later. I'm on the other end of that. I'll do a workout and then I'll be like, okay, I want to improve the score. Let me try it a few days later.
Yeah. Well, let's think about like the open. People do that. They improve their score by a whole lot over the course of a weekend.
I've never been against repeating open workouts. And I don't know why some athletes, it's less now, but before some athletes were like, oh, just one and done. And people wear that with such pride. And I'm like, hey, I'm way down on the leaderboard, but I want to try to improve by 4 or 5 points. There's been years where not this year, but during that phase, I've basically only did the open workouts for my training, and I do 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, but there's something that you learn every time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you can always try to improve. It's very true. What is your fitness like these days? I know you said you were running a lot, or you're focusing on running, but you've been doing CrossFit for how long now?
Since 15 years.
Okay, so 15 years. Obviously, you're probably your own fitness routine has changed a little bit over those 15 years.
Yes.
So where are you at now?
I'm pretty fit. I'm not as fit as I've ever been. In a happy place with it though. I'm not trying to be the strongest I can be. I used to always be able to, on demand, basically be able to deadlift over 400, and that was something I always wanted to have. I don't have that right now. I've deadlifted recently, and I'm like, okay, I can't hit 400, and I'm totally okay with that. There's a lot of things I don't do. I don't squat snatch a lot. I don't squat clean a lot. It's not the most well-rounded program because I program for myself, but I really enjoy it, and I'm really happy. I want to work on my handstand push-ups, so I do handstand push-ups a lot.
Yeah.
The past year, I was training for this competition, a shooting and rucking competition.
Okay.
So I rucked a lot. From rucking, I also I've always been a good runner, but it helped my running a lot. So recently, I've been running I haven't been running more, but when I run, I do a 3-mile run. And I'm trying to break 20 minutes because I haven't been in the 19s on a 3-mile run since I was in my 20s. So I'm going to break 19 or break 20 soon, and that'll be an achievement for me.
Cool.
So I'm not as strong as I've been before. I'm leaner. I cut carbs pretty hardcore recently, and I've been training a lot, just my engine, and I'm fine with that. I'm okay with not being as strong, not being as well-rounded. For me, I'm in a good place with it. It's one of those things, though, I could never see myself not doing this. So I'm in a good place with it. I don't go in the gym, obviously, for multiple hours a day. I spend, 30 minutes to an hour in the gym, and I get done what I need to do. I'm okay with, but I don't skip workouts. I really make sure I hold myself accountable and try to work out on a very regular basis.
And what is that for you? Is that 3 on, 1 off? Is that a certain number of
Pretty
days a
much
week?
3 on, 1 off.
Okay.
Unless I'm traveling and things have to adjust. Almost never go 4. Even if I feel good, I stay to that 3 on, 1 off. I do get sore, and it lingers much longer now than it has in the past. So I've had to make adjustments for that. My legs definitely get sore and stay sore longer than in the past nowadays. So, but I'm in a happy place with it.
That's good. Do you work out mainly in your garage still? Or are you working out at the ranch? Or
mostly in my garage, and sometimes I'll go to the ranch to do the ruck runs or to do the sometimes just straight runs. But primarily in my garage. I have a nice setup there.
I like it. Last time you were on, I asked you about sort of your daily routine when you're at home. Now it sounds like you're in a much better routine because you're just not traveling. So what does your average day look like now?
So I'll wake up around 5:30 to 6 and read anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour, sometimes an hour and a half, depending on what's going on that day. Eat breakfast, sometimes take the kids to school, sometimes not. And then do some work. I'll get on the computer and put in a good hour or 2 session of CrossFit related work, mainly scheduling and staffing with the seminars. And then from there, I'll go to the ranch and feed the animals.
Oh, you have animals on there.
I have animals now. We have a couple pigs.
Okay.
I feed those. And I have a mule. The mule's been super cool. I love that guy. And I feed him, and then I'll take him for a big walk.
Okay.
And take him for a nice walk around the ranch. I want to get a horse now, too. I'm looking at getting a quarter horse.
What was the reason for getting the mule and the pigs?
So the pigs, my daughter wanted a pet pig.
Okay.
So I got the pigs for that reason. The mule is to pack things. And so there's some parts of the ranch. Did you ever run at the ranch?
I've just gone out for, when we were at training events.
The backside of the ranch is really steep and inaccessible. And I've shot pigs at the ranch that have gone down there and have been really hard to get out.
Okay.
So I'm going to use the mule to help me pack pigs out. And I want to repair the backside of the fence. And I'm going to put all the gear on the mule and hike him up there and do it. And
that's cool.
I'm just really excited about him. And
it's
been really
cool.
fun.
Does he have a name?
Hodar.
He
came named.
Okay.
I didn't name him.
Okay.
It's a Game of Thrones character,
okay.
actually.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah. And but he's been great. And then after that, I'll shoot, anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. Interestingly enough, so I don't shoot for recreation. I don't shoot for fun. I don't shoot to clear my mind. I'm shooting for 3 reasons. I shoot to train, I shoot to compete, and I shoot to hunt. And so, like, you see a lot of people, they'll go to the range and they'll bring all their guns and they'll be with their buddies and they'll have a good time firing off rounds. That's the worst to me. I hate that. I don't like going shooting with friends unless it's at a competition. That's different because that's shooting to compete. But when I shoot, I'm by myself and I'm putting in work. I'm trying to make something better. I never go to the range just to throw down rounds. It's very intentional for me, and that's the process that I enjoy. I don't. That's and I don't want to say I judge people who just go shoot and just hang out with their buddies and drink beer.
But it's not something that you enjoy doing.
That's not something I enjoy doing.
Okay.
And it's interesting because I've been shooting my whole life now, and when I was in the Navy, shooting was a very big part of that, obviously. And even then, I was like, yeah, it was all training, it was all work, it was all there was a deliberate purpose to it, and that's how I view it now. And when you step back and think about it, that's how most things I'm doing have a very deliberate purpose.
Yeah.
The reading, the shooting, CrossFit work.
The mule.
Very deliberate purpose, yes.
Okay, so after the shooting,
and then so after shooting, it's usually around lunchtime. I'll come back, do some more work, do some calls. Then usually in the evening, come back maybe one more time to the ranch, feed the animals, and pick the kids up from school maybe. So I have a very dynamic routine, meaning things are going to happen. Those things are going to happen, but the timing with which they happen varies depending on what I have scheduled calls or if I'm taking the kids to school or not. So I really enjoy what I'm doing now and how it's going down, and this schedule and this life. Why would I travel to Miami to see a bunch of CrossFitters and see a bunch of CrossFitters working out at an event that I'm not overall responsible for? I wouldn't do it. I'm going to stay home and enjoy doing the things, work on the CrossFit stuff, and enjoy doing what I do.
I love that. We're almost ready to wrap up, but I have one more question before we get to the last part, is just in general about CrossFit Health. So I've seen you at most of these MDL1s that we've done, as well as the DDCs, which are the kind of continuing ed conferences that happen at the same time. What is I mean, you've seen the growth of the CrossFit Health classes here where they're training sort of special populations. What is your perspective of the CrossFit Health movement, or what do you think, what is the role of that in CrossFit as a whole?
Interestingly, it's always been that.
Yeah.
Meaning, like, I've worked for CrossFit since 2006, 6, and it was always health. It was always CrossFit Health without it having to be stated as CrossFit Health. We were teaching level 1s all around the world, and we're not teaching to games athletes. We're not teaching to elite people.
Right.
And the same thing happening in the gyms. This has always been going on. For people who came into this late in the last 4 or 5 years, I could see them saying, oh, it's so games focused, and seeing some of the media we're making, and it needs to change and take it in this different direction. But it was never, these things all existed.
Yeah.
We were focused on health, and there was also a big competition scene, and there was the event. Now we've just taken away a lot of the media we've made on the games, and so now on our side we're just basically not showing that at all, and just showing all the health stuff that has been going on the entire time in the community. And now we have these classes which are super cool, but I don't think it's like, this is just business as usual. And it's always been about changing people's lives. Right. It didn't matter who those people were. It could be fit people, it could be non-fit people, overweight people who need it more than others, but it's always been that to me.
That's what it's always been about.
Yep.
So true. Okay, so I asked these 3 questions last time on the podcast, but I thought I would ask them again because a lot changes in 4 years.
And I didn't watch the podcast, so I don't remember.
Okay, perfect. So we'll see. So first question is, what are the 3 things that you do on a regular basis that have the biggest positive impact on your health?
Okay. Reading, for sure, I believe, working out, and eating right. And the eating thing is very important.
Yeah.
And so those have the most positive impact on my physical and mental state of being.
Yeah. You said you've cut carbs a lot recently. What is your general approach to eating now?
I don't follow any dogmatic prescription. Or
You're not keto and fasting.
I don't like giving any of those names. And it's crazy where those names end up and how people use them and label things. And Joe was talking about it yesterday with paleo pancakes. And it is wild how people start capitalizing off those names to sell their product. This morning my wife made me a couple couple eggs with some tomatoes and some avocado. And that's
delicious.
a breakfast. Yeah. And there was a period, interestingly, I stopped drinking for about 3 months. And when I stopped drinking, of course, I started eating a little more carbs. And I'm back to drinking again. But I'm not eating carbs.
Okay. It's all a balance.
But yeah, having a glass of whiskey, a glass or two of whiskey every evening. And but I'm completely pretty much cut out refined carbohydrates, processed carbs, breads. And I definitely noticed a change in my weight. And I haven't stepped on a scale in about 2.5 years.
Wow.
There was a period where I was stepping on a scale every morning, and I was very, because I get into things.
Yeah.
And my wife said, "Hey, you're obsessed with the scale." I'm like, "No, I'm not." She's like, "Yes, you are." I'm like, "All right, I'm going to show you I'm not."
Yeah.
And I didn't.
Just got rid of it.
Stopped stepping on a scale, and I haven't in about 2.5 years. Except, I mean, to be completely honest, yeah, when I go to a doctor's office,
Sure, yeah.
they have you step. You guys have a step on scales. So
you don't have to always look at what the
I
weight
don't
is.
look.
Yeah.
I look away.
There you go.
But I think right now I'm probably low 180s.
Okay. What is one thing that you think would have a big impact on your health, but you have a hard time implementing it?
Well, not drinking. I think.
So how was that time? You said it was a few months you went without
Yeah,
drinking?
but then when I wasn't drinking, I didn't eat. I did eat a little more carbs.
Okay.
So that would have a big impact. Not drinking and not eating carbs. To combine those two, but I enjoy having a glass of whiskey or having a glass of wine. So it's something I'm not going to dive into. Actually, and the truth is, around the games, I'll usually cut both.
Yeah.
So about a month before the games, I did that last year. I do that most years. I don't drink through the games. I'll drink after the games. And that's pretty important to me for my just like discipline.
Yeah.
And being, in my mind, well prepared. I'd hate for something to go wrong and it turns out it wouldn't correlation, not causation.
Right.
But I was drinking the night before and something happened the next day. Makes
sense. What does a healthy life look like to you?
It's so different per individual. I mean, that's the truth with so many of these things. What's the perfect programming? What's the perfect food? There's guidelines, there's directions to go, but it depends. It depends on where you're at in life, what you're doing, what phase, for me, it's what I'm doing right now. It's my little routine, walking the mule, reading in the morning, working out.
Did you ever think when you were like in your 20s that this is what you would love to be doing?
No. And now like I said earlier, I want a horse now. I want to ride a horse around my property. So, but I had horses growing up on the ranch.
Wonderful. Well, this has been great. Thank you, Dave, so much.
Thanks, Julie.
It's always great to get a little bit better understanding of what goes on inside your brain. And so thank you for sharing with everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Hey there, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. It was really great to catch up with Dave and hear from his perspective about some of the changes that have happened within CrossFit and the CrossFit Games over the past year or two, as well as how his approach to life and his role as Games Director have changed and evolved into what they are today. Here are some of my biggest takeaways from our conversation. Number one was about being okay with change and keeping things in perspective. So, as Dave says in the podcast, a lot of the changes that happened within the games format recently were not necessarily under his control or by his choice. And he reflects on how change can be difficult for everyone, but it is a part of life. I think it's so easy for all of us to get wrapped up in the negative or the uncertainty when something changes or is different, but keeping the big picture in perspective and being grateful for all the things that we do have and what growth the change will bring for us is very important. A second takeaway was about the power of having an escape that also helps our mind to grow. I love that Dave talked about how reading has become such a big part of his life and what this habit has done for him. He references reading as an escape from reality, and I think that there's a lot of benefit to finding something like that allows all of us to escape from our day-to-day grind. And so often we're drawn into distractions such as social media or TV or even video games, which are in some ways an escape, but maybe don't facilitate the same intellectual growth as an activity like reading. So it was really cool to hear Dave talk about all the classic novels that he's read recently and how much reading has become an essential part of his life. My third takeaway was about being unapologetically you. So Dave talked about how some of the things he says or posts on social media can be very polarizing, and his frustration with our society today that
We're not able to have real conversations without upsetting people who don't agree with your views. I like how he's been able to let some of the negative comments go and continue to be himself and post about the things he cares about, and being okay with the fact that not everyone is going to agree with him. I think the more that we all hold back on talking about things that are really important to us because we're worried about what other people might think, we're just going to make this problem a bigger and bigger one in the future. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Dave, and I hope you had some great takeaways yourself.
To make sure you never miss an episode and to receive exclusive content from me, head to my website, juliefouché.com, and subscribe to my email list. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and consider giving the podcast a 5-star rating on iTunes. Also, don't forget to share your stories. If you or someone you know has used lifestyle to overcome a serious health challenge, please send me an email at info@juliefouché.com. I'll choose some of these inspiring stories to share here on future episodes. Don't forget you can train with me through Beyond the Whiteboard by visiting trainwithjuliefouché.com. Thank you again so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time on Pursuing Health.